I made 100 levels for my game Lumina Rush. Not just levels that were copy and paste, but 100 unique levels. Making these levels took a bit of time, definitely more time than I originally thought, but I learned an immense amount going through this process. So let's talk about the lessons I learned going down the road of making 100 levels. First, let's get this out of the way. Why 100? Well, I definitely have a very good reason for thinking this, and not just because 100 sounded like a good number. Okay, maybe it was a little bit like that, but the reason I really wanted to make 100 levels was to make enough content for my game. Beating levels in Lumina Rush is the game, and yes, there are time trials to beat and collectibles to grab, but that's the game. This is very similar to other games like Super Meat Boy or N+, which have... oh lord. But it's especially important when players can beat my levels in 5 seconds. 5 seconds? Holy! So yeah, it was very important for me to make enough levels for my players to have enough content. There are 3 core mechanics that are introduced into Lumina Rush that make it unique: propulsion, swinging, and teleportation. All of these mechanics are driven from the gun you have, and they all share 2 things in common with respect to the core element of this game: momentum. All 3 allow players to generate and redirect momentum. They all do it in different ways. Propulsion allows you to shoot and launch yourself in the opposite direction. Swinging allows players to swing in these circle zones, and teleportation launches you in the direction of the teleporter. Throwing in the fact that you can maintain momentum by sliding on the ground or walls, there becomes a solid amount of variety in getting from point A to point B in one single fluid motion. Propulsion would be the first mechanic the player experiences, which both gives the most flexibility and is the hardest to master. Swinging would be the second mechanic experience, giving player another complementary mechanic with momentum. And finally, teleportation would be the easiest to use but add that extra bit of chaos to the game. With each of these elements in mind, I had an idea of the general level structure, keeping each mechanic as the basis for each chapter that the player would progress through. There would be 30 levels in each chapter, and an extra 10 ridiculously hard levels for the players that wanted a bit more of a challenge. With all these unique mechanics, I had more than enough to create 100 levels. Or so I thought. I think every developer gets to a point where they made the base of the game, and now it's time to build off that foundation. We believe we did the hard thing in making the core components, and making the rest of the game should be easy since you're just putting pieces together. But I learned that's a bit off and feels a little bit like this. We take all these tutorials on how to make these components, but once we venture away, we can get a bit lost. This is a time for that originality to shine, but at the same time there's that pressure to make something so wildly unique again and again, and that can be draining. It makes you appreciate the time and dedication of what it takes to be a level designer and respect the creativity that some people can have. It's easy to be a bystander experiencing a piece of content for the first time and having some inspiration, but spend months spending time around gameplay elements and try to continuously come up with unique ideas. In my opinion, that's pretty damn hard. When making 100 levels, I realized there were different types of levels, and some were way easier to make than others. Introduction levels. These are the levels that introduce a new element to the game, and ensures that this is the highlight for the level. This actually feels pretty easy, because you have the novelty of the new element to really hold that level together, and your goal is simply making that level feel good and not overwhelming to the player. Reinforcement levels. This takes a previously introduced element but makes it more difficult by either adding other elements or pushing players' capabilities. This is a bit harder, but isn't too bad, especially when you're combining 2 elements that have a compounding effect. Challenge levels. This takes previously introduced elements and presents them to the player in a new light, or challenge. This is really hard, and in my opinion is what makes a good game. Putting elements that the player is familiar with, but in a new environment or a more difficult environment, is really hard to do over and over again, and it sometimes makes you feel like you've used an element in every possible variation that can possibly be imagined. In order to keep levels feeling unique, you need a good mixture of all three of these types of levels. It's definitely tempting to keep adding new things to be able to keep the game fresh. But sometimes, just because something is new doesn't mean it's worth putting in the game. Keeping the feel of these levels and ensuring there was always a good flow was the top priority for me. And there were often times I had to scrap levels and entire elements just because they would make the game feel worse. I learned ensuring that every new piece would add value to the game rather than just novelty was hard, but necessary to make something worthwhile. When you're going to make 100 levels for a game, do your best to simplify the process of making a level. The average time it would take me to make a level from scratch was between 1 to 2 hours. That adds up fast, so taking any time save you can goes a very long way. For example, I used a tile map system to create the main layout for platforms. I took time to set it up in a way where it would dynamically choose tiles to use depending on its neighbors. This saved me so much time. Another example was having a level design document to be able to reference a level and have a general idea of what that level was about without having to open up its scene. I didn't do this until I was on like level 30. There were so many other things that I could have done to streamline this process that I wish I did, but I didn't, because there's a flip side to this. At some point, you're gonna have to put in the time, the work, the energy to actually just start making. It's time to stop making tools and time to just start grinding. So yeah, I built 100 levels for my game, and yeah, it took a hot minute. They aren't perfect, and there's plenty more polishing and tweaking that will need to be done. But the hardest part is done, which is going from nothing to something. Making a game takes time, and you're gonna have moments when you feel like all of your creative juice is gone. There's going to be moments when making a game doesn't feel that magical anymore, and now it's just work. But that's a good thing, because all good things take a bit of work and time. So if you're interested in my game, check out Lumina Rush on Steam and give it a wish list. A free demo is out now if you want to give it a try. And for those looking to experience more of the game, I have an early access version on itch. 50 levels! And for those and everyone that simply stayed and listened, I just want to say thank you all. You're amazing, and I'll see you next time.